Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Unlimited. Today, we are talking about assumptions and taking fences. Taking offense and important relationship dynamics within the systems and structures of the world and what our responsibility is, and engaging that in a healthy way so that we can show up as our best selves and we can show up for other people in a more powerful and supportive way. This conversation that I have with myself, that I've been having with myself around this topic has been an evolving process with how I support people, both from my time in corporate to now as a coach, and what I've learned in ways that have been helpful, but also problematic. So I own some of the places where I have internalized systems that are detrimental, and what I've learned from the process of excavating those awarenesses. And I think that as far as how we interact with each other, this is some critical components with owning our own responsibility and showing up in a healthy and helpful way. So without further ado, let's get started. Hey there, I'm Valerie Friedlander, Certified Life Business Alignment Coach, and this is Unlimited. This podcast bridges the individual and the societal, scientific and spiritual, positive and negative, nerdy and no, there's just a lot of nerdy. Come on board and let's unlock a life that's as badass as you are. A number of years ago, when I was in corporate, and actually toward the beginning of my corporate management career, I received a powerful lesson. And I say powerful not in a good or bad way, but more of a very impactful lesson that really stuck with me. And it informed a lot of the way that I helped the people who worked under me manage in corporate. And it's also informed several of the dynamics that I've observed in terms of places where people struggle in their interaction with other people. It's the idea of tact. The definition of tact is a keen sense of what to do or say in order to maintain good relations with others, or avoid offense. Now, this is problematic because part of what an emphasis on tact does is it perpetuates this idea of taking care of other people's emotions and the idea of avoiding offense. Well, all right. So anything that is a focus on avoidance, I have found to be potentially at least problematic. Because when we are avoiding something, that is more of a breaking down kind of energy. It's not a creating kind of energy. Right? We're not focused on what we want, as you've heard me say many times in this podcast. It's a focus on what we don't want. We don't want to create offense. Okay, so I kind of like the word offense because I'm someone who likes plays on words, but you can't make someone take offense. That's on them. That's on they decide to take offense. You can't make me take offense. Like, I can choose to take offense, but who wants to take offense? Like, that's a lot of work to take somebody's fence, as I mentioned. The play on words. But also, if there is offense, there is a boundary. There's a wall between you and another person, and it is based in an emotional charge. Well, this indicates to me that there's a desire to avoid an emotional charge. Well, if there is an emotional charge there, that means that there is something to look at. There's something to engage. Our emotions are information about things that are happening inside of us, the way we're experiencing a situation. So the idea that we want to avoid an emotional charge indicates, well, avoidance of emotions. And then that's hugely problematic. So, I'm kind of breaking this down a lot because I think that some of this concept is key to a lot of our resistance to engaging real issues that need to be looked at in our society. So in my learning around anti-racism, digging into anti-racism trainings and reading and listening, one of the big terms that's popped up is the idea of tone policing. And that is defined as a conversational tactic that dismisses the ideas being communicated when they are perceived to be delivered in an angry, frustrated, sad, fearful, or otherwise emotionally charged manner. So you can kind of see how the idea of tact and tone policing are very related. Part of the reason that I went into coaching was when I looked at the things that I was gifted in and what I enjoyed doing, a lot of it had to do with people and interactions between people and helping those interactions. It was something that I was really great with, working with the upper management, working with the sales team, working with our clients, and working with the people who worked under me. And my background within this structure of corporate was I was the credit collections manager. So that meant that I was working with people around money and them owing us money, or them likely owing us money, and how we were going to make business work. So I was looking at lien laws. I was looking at credit scores and saying, hey, your credit score isn't sufficient for us to do business, or what do we need to do to secure the funding and all of that sort of stuff, like really touchy subjects. And I was good at it. That was the part that I was good at. The other financial stuff, like statements and things like that, all the numbers, not the best at. I would often mix up zeros, not like in writing, but like when I was talking them, which, that's a whole nother thing. But anyway, fun facts about me. So this is part of what led me to mediation and then eventually led me to becoming a coach and supporting people in feeling empowered and making active choices in their life. This is something that I would do with people who worked under me in corporate. Well, so corporate being a ladder, you needed to be able to function well and communicate well to get what you want. That sounds really interesting in terms of, okay, get what you want. Well, isn't that a little manipulative? Yeah. When you think about what are you trying to control? Are you working on controlling yourself or are you working on controlling other people? And that's where we get kind of lost, is that controlling other people ties to outcomes and what other people do. And yeah. Okay. So I wanted to look at this because with my focus on helping people feel empowered in their life and thus able to take action that both makes the process enjoyable and also achieves results, because when we're talking about results, we're talking about things like making money, making a living, and achieving goals. And we're all functioning in a system and structures within that system. So while we may recognize that there are problems within it that need to be changed, it still exists. So the question that I have then is, what aspect is just managing dysfunction versus engaging it and shifting it? If normal is problematic and I'm helping people function within what is normal, then that is problematic. So how do we create self-empowerment within a dysfunctional structure and also take action to change that structure? And there are lots of different approaches to what that would look like. And definitely people have different ideas about how to do that and what it will take to do that effectively. But back to just, okay, what is empowerment? And, for me personally, what is my role in this system? So I'm going to tell you the story of this lesson, and then, we can kind of look at what the issue is and how do we own our own individual responsibilities within these systems to create change as well as take care of our needs. So basically what happened was I had just stepped into a new role in corporate. I just stepped into the management role, and I realized that taking on a salaried position meant that I was getting paid less than what I would have been had I not been switched to salary. And so even though I had gotten a pay raise, because I was working so many more hours, the raise actually ended up being a decrease in pay per hour. So I was being compensated less for my time and energy. So at first that was fine for me because I was like, oh, I'm learning this new role. This was what felt like a substantial step up in responsibility. So I was learning the ins and outs. I was learning lean laws. I was learning all these things. And I felt like that learning was enough of a curve that it counted as compensation. At a certain point, I felt like I had my bearings, and I decided that it was time to ask for a raise. So I sent an email saying, hey, this is the situation. I would like it if we could talk about my being considered for a raise. I got a very angry call from the owner of the company who received my email because I didn't have somebody between me and him at the time anymore. And he said that I was tactless, that I was unappreciative, that he got my email and thought that maybe he should just immediately fire me, and that he decided to call me instead and let me know how horrible my email was. And I was completely taken off guard. And just like, what is happening? And he told me to Google tact. And I was appalled because I thought, I'm like one of the most tactful people I know. Like, I am very considerate of other people's feelings. I approach things very tactfully. I don't even understand what's going on here. So I went home that day and I seriously thought about quitting. And I was just beside myself with what had happened. When I calmed down, I thought, you know what? I'm gonna Google tact. Just cause, let's just see what it says. And, I found the definition as I already read it to you. And I was like, yeah, I don't understand how he took offense to this. This wasn't personal at all. How is this offensive? Of course, I'm looking at it through my lens, not thinking about his lens, and I don't see how that is. Then I come across a quote by Abraham Lincoln that said, tact is the ability to describe others as they see themselves. And I thought, oh, so the way I approached this was counter to the way this person saw himself. Because I knew from the time that I'd already been in that company that he saw himself as a benevolent benefactor, as someone who, people didn't earn their position. People didn't earn their income, he was generous. Like nobody actually earned what he gave them. He was generous to give them the amount that he gives them, and that sort of thinking. And I thought, well, in that case, if that's the way he sees himself, my approach did not at all acknowledge his generosity. It actually challenged his generosity. So the way I approached that, it was a threat to his view of himself as generous because it didn't acknowledge that at all. So I changed how I worded it. And I actually kept the emails because it was such a profound learning experience for me as a relatively young person, fairly new in a career. And what I did was I sent an email saying, I'd like to apologize for the presentation of my request the other day. I spent a lot of time reflecting on our conversation and the way I approached the situation, and my presentation was quite terrible. And while it can be explained by lack of experience and nervousness in making such a request, it was totally unacceptable. And I appreciate that rather than acting on the reaction to my tactless email, you instead took the time to call me and inform me of my mistake and give me guidance to handling it better in the future. I've taken that guidance, including Googling tact, and revised my email to what I feel is a much better reflection of what I had intended to say. And then I hope that you will pass off the initial email as a learning experience and review the following email as my official request. And then I send an email basically just saying how much I appreciate the opportunities. And, after receiving such a generous opportunity, I'm hesitant to ask for more. However, you've always been very fair. And upon review of the situation, I hope you will understand my need to make this request. And then I outline the situation with the salary and the time and, that I hope that we can discuss the possibility of raising my salary and blah, blah, blah. I actually feel kind of nauseous reading that email. And before I talk about that, I tell you the outcome of it was that I did get the raise. He sent me a message saying that it was a much better approach. Thank you. And I think you're doing a great job. So let's look at a raise. And I'll put it into effect next week. So I got what I was looking for. I changed the approach. It basically proved the idea of tact, right? Like if you speak to other people the way they see themselves, you are much more likely to get what you want. And that stood out to me. It was something that I used with other people who I managed in the company to let them know, hey, make sure that you are speaking to this person the way that he sees himself, and notice that within this company, like how people see themselves, so that you can be more effective in your communication and get more of what you're looking for when you're interacting with people. Okay, so back to the fact that this kind of makes me nauseous now reading it. And what I was saying earlier about tone policing, because my initial email was not inappropriate. There was nothing wrong with it. It was a totally legitimate request, and it was straightforward and to the point. What occurred was tone policing. In the position of power, he took offense. And I almost got fired because of that. And this is something that happens to people, especially Black people and people of color, all the time. This is one of the reasons why this has come up a lot in the talking around anti-racism. And I've been thinking about this in terms of my work, not only within that, but also because it is manipulative. So where does the boundary lie between manipulation and empowerment? And I would love to hear your thoughts on this and where you've seen this in your own life. Ultimately, it comes down to who has the power in the situation? Who has the power in the structures and the dynamics of what is going on. And in this case, it was my boss, obviously, because he was responsible for whether or not I got fired or kept my job. In other situations, it could be very different. Maybe there's an equal engagement, but this came up in another context within the coaching community. I saw someone comment on helping NASA scientists write emails to better articulate to their supervisors. And I was like, okay, so I can't control these structures. I can acknowledge them, but I can't control them. And so some of this may be needed, for people to be able to get what needs to get done and for us to start making changes. We do need to acknowledge other people's feelings, but the people in the positions of power, the people with greater privilege in whatever system or structure or hierarchical dynamic exists, are the ones who have the greater responsibility. This goes into things like the idea of a guy catcalling and then going, I'm like, I don't like that. Well, you should feel lucky I find you attractive. Like that sort of thing, which plays into rape culture. That idea that you should feel or you should behave. When we start shoulding on other people, especially if we have a more powerful position, and maybe it's body type, maybe they're bigger than I am. You should feel lucky. That sounds very threatening, right? So what is the power dynamic? Where this comes into play when I think about a responsibility as a coach and as a individual and supporting people feeling empowered ultimately comes into, okay, well, depending on where you are in these structures, what do you need to do? What is your responsibility? Well, one, the person with the lesser power is going to, in that structure, is going to need to focus primarily on being okay. Right? So maybe it's a survival that needs to come into play. And that is often thought of as like, well, we don't want to be in survival mode. Well, sometimes survival mode is necessary to, survive. The person who has the more power in the dynamic, their responsibility is to do the work, to notice what about what happened is offensive. And ultimately that comes into how do you see yourself? So in this other situation in corporate, I was in the survival position. So I found a way to survive. Now, granted, I could have also chosen, given where my own space was, I could have chosen to go, you know what, that I'm not participating in. And I could have left. I didn't, but that was an option for me. It is not an option for everyone. So just to acknowledge that, I continue to perpetuate that dynamic also by teaching other people how to do it. And it's played into other places. Looking at it this way and recognizing, okay, so in any situation, we have the opportunity to go, if you take offense, if something is upsetting to you, rather than avoiding the emotion, asking yourself, what did this threaten in me? What does this interaction challenge about how I see myself? And engage the story of how you see yourself. Because every story that you have about who you are has rules for how you're supposed to be in that story and what that looks like. And in those rules, we make assumptions that other people have the same stories and hold the same rules. So I would think, if I break my rule, I think this. So if I break my rule of expressing gratitude, then I think that you're a jerk, right? That could be it. And so thus, if you break my rule of not expressing enough gratitude, then you must also think that I'm a jerk. And so there's this assumption that happens there. And I've talked about assumptions before, and I'll talk about them again because they are a huge block to us effectively communicating and creating what we want in the world, and these assumptions that we make about ourselves, about other people. So taking that moment to pause and not even necessarily say anything right away other than like, I need a moment, right? If there's an emotion there, it's something to look at, and it doesn't mean anything about the other person. It means something about you and your relationship to the situation. And that deserves attention. Your emotions deserve attention. They don't necessarily deserve to be in control, because that causes all kinds of problems, just like with this situation where his emotions were in control. They were the ones in charge. His offense was the most powerful in the dynamic. And so that when you allow your emotions to be in control, then we create really problematic situations. But that doesn't mean we want to avoid them, which is where that whole idea of tact comes in, which is avoidance of the emotional charge. So taking some time, taking some space to look at the emotional charge and what the story is behind it. What did this threaten about who you believe that you are? And how true is that? What information do you need that maybe you're missing? You know, like a lot of times when we make assumptions, it's because we're missing a piece of information that our brain is just connected dots that aren't necessarily there. It's just like, well, because this reminds me of this, or I think this when I do this, or I do this when I think this, that this other person must be like this. And this emphasizes one of the problems with the golden rule. The idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It speaks to the idea of developing empathy, but it also sets a dangerous precedent to assume what other people want or think based on your own wants that are derived from your lived experience, which may be quite different from theirs. It also sets up the dynamic to assume that other people will react the way that you think that you would in that situation. And that incongruity can trigger all of those stories and the emotions that relate to them, the disappointment, anger, defensiveness. So taking a moment to really think about what's going on there and take a look at those emotions and what your role is in the dynamic. We often have a desire to avoid confrontation because it feels uncomfortable, it feels scary, it feels yucky, it feels dangerous. We've learned that confrontation is dangerous. So the thing that we need to look at is, what is the danger here? What is the perceived danger? And it could be anything from losing your job, like in this scenario, to losing a friendship, losing some relationship, which again, rejection is a big fear. It taps into a biological wiring around survival that relates to, if I'm rejected from the group, that would mean death way back when. So that there's a deep need to not be rejected. Yet there's a certain level of discomfort and challenging norms that needs to happen in order for change to happen. And that starts inside. That starts with, what are those stories? What is my role? What is my position within this? And being able to have compassion for other people and being willing to look at our own stuff. And again, that can bring up a lot of really uncomfortable emotions, things like shame, and trigger inner critic messages of not being good enough. And those perpetuate inaction and avoidance because it's a deep belief in who you are as a person. Nobody wants to believe they are not good enough. And anything that triggers that is going to be something they're going to want to avoid. So developing your own self-connection is key. Connecting to what your values are and how you show up to those values, rather than assuming other people should have the same values and show up to them the same way. Again, that ties right back into assumptions about other people and what they should be doing. Notice those shoulds. They are dangerous and they create all kinds of problems. A healthier response within that, I have done something that caused harm, or something is incongruent with the person that I want to be. It's threatened a value that I have for myself, because sometimes that happens. Sometimes we do things that we didn't realize, and then we find out that, oh, that was harmful, and we have to look at it. If we don't look at it, we don't grow, and we're doomed to repeat it or do worse. So guilt doesn't feel very good, but it gives you responsibility. Embarrassment, disappointment, even self-doubt. There's a space there, an opportunity there to go, there is something out of alignment. And owning that responsibility then allows you to lean into the knowledge to learn and grow and do something differently. And it helps to recognize what you have power over and what you don't have power over. Trying to control other people, places, and things, and assume things about them because of who you are and the way you are and the way you do things and your stories and your rules is problematic, which is why it is so important to do the work to look at what are your stories? What are your rules? What are your values? And what do you do to honor them? And how do you show up to them? Not in a, we're creating this vision of like this perfect way of being end results, because the one thing that will always be the same in life is change. So how do you step into that? How do your values and your stories and your rules allow you to step into evolution of yourself and of your relationships? And ultimately from there, the world and the impact that you have on it. Looking at these things is critical. So where is your responsibility within this? It's looking at you. And that ultimately is the work that I help people do, is looking at themselves and their responsibility in the world. If you would like support to take a look at you and be able to show up with a graceful resilience to your relationships, whatever your role is in them, so that you can be actively choosing and showing up to growth and change, then let's chat, because that's what I'm here for. And I would love to support you in doing just that. And I will talk to you all next week. Thanks for listening. I so appreciate you being here. If you got something out of today's episode, please share it. Leave me a review, take a screenshot, and post it on social with a shout out to me. Send it to a friend, or, all of the above. Want to hang out more? Join me on Instagram. Or better yet, get on my mailing list to make sure you don't miss out on anything. And remember, your possibilities are as unlimited as you are. Allow yourself to shine, my friend. The world needs your light. See you next time.